Joining me now is Women's Forum Australia's Head of Advocacy, Stephanie Bastiaan. Stephanie, the Queensland Government's decision to pause so-called gender-affirming hormone treatments for children and launch a review into gender treatments has sparked a fresh offensive from the Australian Professional Association for Trans Health, called Project 491. AusPath claims that the Queensland ban is contrary to the current best evidence-based guidelines and represents political interference in healthcare. Can I please get your reaction there, Stephanie?
Look, what we're seeing is activist organisations ignoring the evidence, not even wanting a review into the evidence, and they're now trying to fundraise and do their own thing. I mean, this week we saw the doctor who was running the Cairns Gender Clinic has now moved to Melbourne and is prescribing puberty blockers via telehealth. According to The Guardian, a 40-minute consultation is all it's taking. So these organisations actually need to be investigated and their government funding needs to be pulled if they're receiving them.
Now, we've had Health Minister Mark Butler come under fire for his response to Peter Dutton's comments about protecting women's sport. Let's remind ourselves what the opposition leader had to say last week in his interview with Peter Credlin.
I just don't believe in discriminating against anyone, not on the basis of anything. And for young girls not to be able to achieve their Olympic dream, their pathway to a World Cup, or to be displaced from a team because somebody has physiological advantage over them. I just don't think that is that's not in the spirit of sport.
Now, this was Mark Butler's response on Sunday.
What is Labor's position on trans participation in professional sport?
Well, I'll have a go. Katie might want to add to this, but this is not an issue in Australia. We have very clear legal provisions in the Sex Discrimination Act. Section 42 says that sporting codes are able to put in place measures to ensure that particular sporting competitions are reserved for, in this case, the case you're referring to, biological women.
Stephanie, he says it's not an issue in Australian sport. He mentions Section 42 of the Sex Discrimination Act. But as Senator Claire Chandler pointed out, just last year, in 2024, male players won a women's football competition. And when the organisers asked for the government to help protect the safety of their players by reviewing the legislation that is failing to protect women's sport, the Albanese government ignored them. Stephanie, what do you make of all of this? Is he just ignorant about what's happening in this country, or are they so ideologically captured by the trans activists that they don't want to tackle this issue?
Look, I think it's very clear Mark Butler has his head in the sand. The Sex Discrimination Act actually removed the definition of woman when Julia Gillard inserted gender identity in the 2013 amendments. That's why we have all these problems. It should be protecting women in sport, but it's not, because it doesn't define what they are. And we have a problem in this country where, particularly at a community and state level, sporting bodies have been ideologically captured, prioritising inclusion and diversity over fairness and safety. So we've got a lot of women, particularly in, say, football and soccer, who are being injured. There is a blackout on the media. They don't report the players that are causing these injuries. And the E-Safety Commissioner has actually intervened on international outfits like Redux, who have reported these identities. And if you're someone like Kiralee Smith, who has called this out, you're slapped with an AVO and vilification claims. So we do have a problem. Our laws are not only failing to protect women, they are actually being weaponised to silence anyone who speaks out.
Now, before you go, Pauline Hanson yesterday moved a motion in the Senate to establish a real inquiry into the human cost of experimental child gender treatments in Australia in order to give victims and their families a voice. And of course, Labor, the Greens, but also a number of Liberals and independent senators like David Pocock, Tammy Terrell and Lydia Thorpe, they all voted this motion down. It's the usual suspects striking again, Stephanie.
Look, I was encouraged by the number of Liberals who did vote in favour, but I think Pauline Hanson's motion, the details in that, just show how weak and pathetic the current federal government's review is. It outlines a number of issues. It calls to review the harm done to people like detransitioners and the whole basis of this crisis. So I think what we need, though, is we need strong leadership from perhaps the Liberal leader, Peter Dutton. This is not going to go away. This is going to be an election issue. So unless Albanese and Peter Dutton both come up with a policy, they're going to be in trouble because the Australian public want change.
Well, this is just the biggest slam dunk imaginable politically because it's an issue where right and wrong is pretty clear, and the overwhelming majority of the population, the mainstream opinion, is very much on the side of fairness, on the side of respecting biological reality. And yet we've got the activists who have seemed to have spooked both Labor and the coalition into backing these radical positions, or in the case of the coalition, kind of being too scared to even talk about it and to come up with an articulate argument about why what we've got in place at the moment isn't good enough. Now, before you go, we expect the likes of Lydia Thorpe, the Greens, Labor, to vote down an inquiry like this. But tell me about the Liberals who voted against this motion.
Look, I think there are a key group of activists that have taken the wrong position on this, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of ignorance of the political fallout, but it's just not good enough. The evidence is there. 13 countries have now wound back puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones and limited gender-affirming care because of the lack of evidence. 26 US states have done the same, and of course we've got the new executive order that's limiting the funding. The tide has turned globally on this. There are doctors here speaking out, and it's just not good enough. They need to come to the table on this as a party and to make some changes.
Stephanie Bastiaan, thanks for your time tonight.